So before we get started, does anyone have a question about anything? No? All right. Let's see here. So all you have to do this week is your inter-office memo. So if anyone brought theirs, or if they want to email it to me, if you have your computer with me, we can look at those if you want. You know, if you don't want people to know that it's yours, I'll cover up the name or whatever. So that's something we can do. It's often helpful to do that as a class, you know, to workshop, so to speak, a piece of writing. So think about that. But the first thing that I wanted to look at is the career presentation, because that's going to be the next thing coming up. And that is in Module 5 here. These are terrible technology. Supposedly they're going to get all this replaced. We'll see. Okay, so these are the instructions. So basically this needs to be 12 slides minimum, right? And it's basically about, you know, a career. That, you know, this is a technical college, and not everyone, you know, we have a lot of dual enrollment students here. Let me put that away. I end up playing with my phone. I've called 911 during class before. That's not good. So, you know, we have a lot of dual enrollment students here, so those students are probably not looking for jobs yet. Or maybe they are, I don't know. But we do have, you know, people here who are learning a trade and may even already have a trade and are just looking for promotions and more pay, like, aren't we all, right? So anyway, this would be about that. You know, what is it that you are doing now or want to do? What are you here to learn about? Or if you are here to get into something else, you know, you may be doing one thing and you don't like it. Some interesting people this semester who have, you know, done other things and have been fairly successful at it, and then are just looking to branch out and into new stuff. So anyway, so you'll find an advertisement. So let's say you want to be a hostess at TGI Fridays, right? So you will look here on everything's online now, right? Indeed, or, you know, apps too, right? Monster, whatever it is, and find an advertisement for this. And you know, if you're studying a trade or something like that, then you want it to be related to that. And then you will build this, some sort of presentation, PowerPoint, Prezi, Google Slides, whatever. Although don't use Google Slides. You know what? I'm going to get rid of that too, because they don't work with our learning management system with Blackboard, right? You can put it on there, but then I can't look at it. And then this whole thing where I'm trying to get in touch with you and say, I don't want to give you a 0 on this, but I can't look at it. So I will change that. I don't even know if Prezi will work. PowerPoint's the old standby. You know, Microsoft has done a great job getting everybody to work with their stuff, right? Even Apple now, you can download Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and all that for Apple, and it works really, really well. You know, I think that's what Google's trying to do by giving schools and high schools and everything Chromebooks for free and all that, so that you get used to that, and then when you get out of high school, that's what you want to use. You know, it's all about money, right? So anyway, PowerPoint's probably the safest thing. Although, you know, I like Prezi; they're kind of cool. And then, so what you want to do is your first slide will be a cover slide or an introduction, and it needs to have your name, date, and job selection. And so that is part of the rubric by itself. And then 7 to 9 slides, just about the job. You know, what it is, why you're interested in it, what you know about the, company, what you can add. And we'll look at the example. It's a fairly decent example. And then 3 to 5 slides with your qualifications, right? Why you were qualified for that job, why they should hire you. And then 1 slide with at least 2 questions that you would ask at the job interview. You know, people, it's always good to have a couple questions that makes you look sort of prepared and involved and intelligent. So that would be the last one. So a total of a minimum, I think I said 12, 1, 4, 11, yeah. So a minimum of 12. And this is where you will turn it in. Also, so this is a discussion board. So you can attach a PowerPoint to the discussion board. When you do that, take a look at a couple classmates and offer some feedback on theirs. Okay, so let's see if we can look at the example. Maybe, there we go. Okay, so this would be the first slide, you know, with the title. I guess you could use that, or if you have something a little more creative, you can do that. You know, your name, the date, and then the job posting. And this person is more talented than myself at putting together a slideshow, and you know, actually put a copy of the job posting on their first slide, so that looks pretty good. Let's see here. And so this is getting into the body part. I think it was a minimum of 7 slides about the career. And so this is, you know, why, this is a good idea. Why did you select this? Well, this is what I do, right? This is how I make my money. I can do the job, I have the skills, and you know, this is a job that's going to give me more experience so I can continue to progress in my field. Why am I interested in this? And so this is, you know, just a little story about that. You know, you could say, because, you know, I don't know what welders make, but because welders make $90 an hour, and I like that, you know. That's a valid reason. What do I know about the company? So if this is a company, you can Google them and maybe find out a little bit of information about them. They may have a specialty, or you know, maybe they're local, or maybe they're nationwide, or even international. You know, what would I add to the company? So these would be your skills. You know, team player, motivated, passion, can work under pressure and meet deadlines. And these would be good things to have in mind for a job interview. You know, most people interviewing are going to ask, why should we hire you, right? And you want to have an answer for that. When I was younger, I didn't really worry about preparing for this sort of thing. You know, I just went, but I have had an experience a couple times where I was caught without an answer at some job interviews, and you look pretty bad. You know, even I'm old enough now and have had enough happen in my life that I will try to actually drive to the place like the week before. So, you know, have you ever showed up somewhere and you can't figure out where to park? Like it's not labeled really well, and you're driving around and time's clicking by and you're going to be late, and then maybe the only place you can find is like $15, and it's like, you know, now I'm wasting all this money to do this and I'm going to be late anyway. So I'll try to go beforehand, you know, if it's, you know, unless it was in Birmingham or something like that. So I know where I'm going to be. That takes pressure off of me in what's already sort of a high pressure situation, right? Okay, and then how could the company help with your career? So that's fairly generic. There may be a great reason, you know, something very specific. If not, just more experience. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? What do I love about welding? Here's qualifications you could put in. why you should hire me, ideas for further growth, things that you would want to accomplish in the near term. People tend to ask that too, right? Where do you see yourself a year from today? Where do you see yourself 5 years from today? I can't ever figure out if saying, well, I'd like to have your job. I can't ever figure out if that's a good idea or not. Sometimes people get offended, I think. But, you should have a desire to move up, right? And then questions for them. Will I have, you're hiring me at this spot. Is there opportunity for growth here? Or, some companies are really small. And, you're not going anywhere. Or, maybe you like to travel. Is there going to be an opportunity for travel? Maybe you don't like to travel, and that might be a deal breaker for you, so you may want to know that. Did you give your employees a raise last year? How did you all handle, this is a great one, how did you all handle the pandemic? Because that'll probably let you know a lot about a company. We made everybody work all the time, and 90% of our force got sick. Okay, maybe I'm not working here. Those are valid questions, right? And so I think that's it. So that's basically the idea. Not super complicated. Most of you all seem to be better at PowerPoints than I am. Like I've got kids. My youngest is 15. She'll whip one of those out in 10 minutes, right? So maybe takes a little bit of thought in some work, but this is not overwhelming, right? Okay, so that's the next thing coming up, and then you have the memo due this Sunday. Are there any questions about this? Yeah.
What if you're going into the field and you don't have experience in it yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you would probably, want to include that. Is that what you're going to school here for? So you would put that in. I don't know if you've started in with any classes in the field. If you have, you might want to mention that. For instance, when I interview for jobs teaching, I will say what classes that I took when I was in school. Like I wasn't hired to teach business writing, but one semester they needed someone to do it. I was like, I took business writing and grant proposal writing. I can do that. So you want to say these are the classes I've taken. This is kind of where I am, and it could be like this will be a great entry level job for me to learn, as a first job or whatever. It's just that sort of thing. And then you would want to reference, I have done, even though these aren't in the same field, I worked here and I worked there, and I was promoted or I did well, that sort of thing, just to show that you have a good work ethic or something like that. Any other questions? Okay, so this is on our website if you want to look at it again, just to kind of get ideas from. Good gracious. Okay. Then, yep, instructions, Dropbox. Don't forget to respond to a couple people. Okay, I think that's all I have about that. Okay, so did anyone have questions, or did anyone want to talk about their memos?
I have a question.
Yes.
So mine is still, I left my computer at home, but like the part where you like state how you want the rules and stuff like that.
Yes. Like what it should look like?
Yeah.
You want to know where that is?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so you should be able to come over to course content, and we're almost done with them, but all the writing stuff is in here. And just for future reference. So then, you know, the next thing we have, you can't see it, it's a TED Talk thing where basically you watch TED Talks and write kind of a summary about them on a discussion board. And then there is, these are just some random writing assignments, and then a resume and a cover letter. But the like specific, this is such a terrible computer. Writing assignments are here in Module 4, and the memo is right here. Good Lord have mercy. So here are the directions for that. And to me, the best way, well, it says right here, you know, all the memos should include to, from, date, and subject lines. But the best way is to look at the example. And so it should look something like this. And this is on the website. Obviously, you wouldn't put double space or triple space. That's just to let you know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you want to try to write that down? Or
No, I just wrote down, look at the, you know.
okay, cool. I didn't want to close it if you were actually copying it down. Okay. Okay. Well, let's then take a look at so last week we had just started to look at these right here. So I thought we'd finish up with these, and then we would talk actually a little bit more about grammar, just from grading people's work. It seems like we need to talk about the subject and verb agreement, and then pronoun and antecedent agreement. So we talked about these first one, and I can't remember who did it, but we found out that we need a comma before but, because that is a coordinating conjunction, you know, a fanboy conjunction, and I bet these aren't going to work. And so that needs to work with a comma. And that comes before the conjunction. Okay, well that's disappointing. All right. And then we talk about number 2. You don't need a comma here. That this one is put in that order to sort of try to fool you, but there's no subject after the word but. There's not another noun, right? There's not an I or you or Tim or Sarah or anything like that. So this person, he likes to buy and he hates to pay. So this one person's doing both actions, so you don't need a comma there. What about number 3? Do we need a comma in that sentence? Exactly right. So this is a, an introductory adverb clause. I don't necessarily think you need to know that unless you're going to teach English. But it's telling you when something happened, right? So it's modifying the verbs. So when the snow stopped, comma, we were able to leave, right? And if you break those apart, this won't stand by itself. If you walk up to your friend and say, when the snow stopped, they'll be like, and, but if you say, we were able to leave, they'd be like, okay, good. I'm glad that you were able to leave. That can stand by itself. What about number 4? You see, we have the semicolon there already. Do we need a comma? Exactly right. So a lot of times when we use a semicolon, we'll use it's a coordinating adverb after the semicolon, and a comma comes after that. So great job with that. What about number 5? Exactly right. It's very similar to number 3, right? It's telling you how the puppy's acting. So wagging its tail, comma, the puppy barked in excitement. Good job. What about number 6? After wives, where else? And after mothers, yes. So it's just a list, right? It's giving you a list of things that contemporary women try to be. And we set off items in a list with commas. And I think we talked about last week in class, I notice especially a lot of younger people today don't use what's called a serial comma or the Oxford comma, the comma before the and, before the last item. In American English, that is still needed. That is still part of the format. That is required. So we use the serial comma or the Oxford comma in America. What about number 7? I'm sorry? It does need a comma. Not after Emerson, after short. Yes, exactly right. Because, yeah, 2 adjectives, and they're both modifying speech. So you could say Emerson gave a short speech, right? And that's fine. You could say Emerson gave an interesting speech. You can say Emerson gave a short and interesting speech, which is how you know we're going to put a comma there.
I was thought if you can put and in the spot and the sentence still makes sense.
That's exactly right. If you can put and there and it makes sense, then you need a comma. Sometimes this adjective will be modifying this word, in which case you can't use and you would not need a comma. But in this case we do. What about number 8? After May 1. After Birmingham. After Atlanta. One more.
Oh, after that, too.
Yep. Dates and places, like dates and addresses, take a lot of commas. What about number 9? After, yes, and father, exactly right. So this is, in a positive or an aside. It's just giving you a little more information. It's not necessary for the sentence. You can say my mother disciplined me, and that's fine, right? This is just a little more information, Number 10. Exactly right. And with quotations or dialogue, also a lot of comma work can be involved there. Whenever you're introducing a quote, use a comma after he asked or he said or she said. What about number 11? Exactly right. Well, wait. After starts. Yeah. But this is going back to like the number 3 or whatever it was, where you've got this introductory clause, an adverb clause telling you when something happens, and so you set that off with a comma. And I think I mentioned last week, you're never wrong for using a comma with an introductory clause. There are a few times where you don't need one, but it's not wrong to use one. So I usually just use it. That way I don't have to worry about being exactly right all the time. What about number 12? After shoes, after socks. Exactly right. Once again, another list. This guy or girl, they had a big night, didn't they? When they got up in the morning, they couldn't find their clothes. What about number 13? And this one's kind of weird and kind of hard to tell.
After inform?
Well, after you and after students, because it's sort of like you're addressing, the way this is written, it doesn't really sound like it, but it's sort of like you're saying, I'm happy to inform you, students, that school is almost over. You know, it'd be like if you said, I'm happy to inform you, Jim, you got the job. So you're addressing somebody, but it's not really necessary for the sentence. And what about 14? After plants, where else? Well, after enough. This is the same sort of idea as this one. You know, this, surprisingly enough, is just sort of an aside. But you don't need it for the sentence. And it can move around, right? You could say, surprisingly enough, some plants need no sunlight. Or you could even put it at the end. Some plants need no sunlight, surprisingly enough. That's sort of a sign that this should be set off with commas because it can move all around. Same with like students. Students, comma, I'm happy to inform you that school's almost over. What about number 15? After no, exactly right. And where after no? Inside. That's a very common mistake. In American English, almost always, like enough, just do it. You will be wrong so rarely that it won't matter. Periods and commas go inside quotation marks. Like see here at the end, that period's inside the quotation marks. I believe in British English it's a little different, but in American English, commas and periods inside quotation marks. So we put a comma here, one more comma. After insisted, exactly right. And once again, this is sort of extra information or introducing a quotation, so that's why we use commas there. What about number 16? After therefore, exactly right, like the one we had earlier, right? So we've got the semicolon, we've got the adverb here, and we use a comma after that. What about 17? After soon, exactly right. Because that's just like, some people call that a tag expression. You don't need to say, doesn't it? You know, you're just making it clear, basically, that that's a question, you know? Because if you're saying the movie starts soon, that could just be a statement. So the movie starts soon, comma, doesn't it? What about 18? No, not after man. So this is a good thing to notice. What's the subject of this sentence? Man, exactly. Husband is sort of an object. It's telling you what the man is or was. You know, this is a form of the verb is. So your subject is man, your verb is was. So, which is why it can be helpful to know parts of speech. A sentence can't work right if you put a comma between the subject and the verb, because they have to be together to do work. Now you could put 2 commas that are telling you this information is extra, but you would never just separate them by 1 comma. So this is like the speech sentence. So where would we put the comma? Remember the short, interesting speech? It's going to be after Mhm.
Right.
The bright and creative man was her husband.
Okay.
So we'll put the comma between bright and creative. What about number 19?
After Rose.
After Rose. It's just an introductory phrase telling you when the audience applauded. And then how about number 20?
Reluctantly.
Exactly right. So your introductory phrase can be just one word. Or it can be 12, 15, 20. The length doesn't really matter. It's the function. So we'll put a comma right there. Good job with those. Good job. Okay, so let's see here. Who here speaks a language in addition to English? What do you speak?
Spanish.
Spanish, okay. Anyone else? What do you speak? Somali, okay, and I know nothing about Somali. I know a tiny bit about Spanish. But one of the things I do know is there's, and of course I'm blanking out on one of them. So a lot of languages are inflectional. Spanish is an inflectional language. Words are masculine and feminine, right? They end in an O or an A, right? And it doesn't matter if like a dude is doing something or a chick is, it's the word itself has a gender. And so all that's got to match, right? English used to be that way. So and English came from England, believe it or not. The Romans, from Italy, right? They had the Roman Empire, and they went spread out. They went all the way to England. In England's an island, right off the coast of France. So they sailed across the channel there. They took over England, where they were speaking at the time Old English, which looks crazy. It does not look like English at all. And what happens when people take you over? I mean, a lot of things happen, but language-wise, you got to learn to speak their language, right? Otherwise, you're not going to get anything. If you want to work for them, you got to be able to talk to them. Once again, it's all about money. It comes back to money. So, Old English adopted some Latin, is what the Romans spoke. Okay? So then, after that, and the Roman Empire started to fall apart around 400, there's still stuff in downtown London that the Romans built in the 400s. Not much, but a few walls. So then after that, from up near Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Iceland and Greenland, the Vikings. And there's TV shows. There's one on Stars, I think. There's a couple TV shows going on right now about this. They would just sail down and work their way from the north, or mostly from the middle of England, down south toward London, and take things over. In fact, they just found two, I think, hoards. The Vikings the Vikings would steal a bunch of stuff, and then they would get worried that someone was going to steal it from them, so they would hide it. And then they'd either get killed or they'd forget where it was. And so even today, they're finding these things from like the 800s, right? Gold, stuff like that. So anyway, the Vikings did that for 200 or 300 years. So Old English took on a lot of Old Norse, is what they call it. And so Latin is a super inflected language, worse than anything we do now. There's some old movies and kids in class reciting forms of verbs. They're probably doing Latin. And Old Norse was very inflected. And then in 1066, the French took over England. And French is an inflectional language too. Not as bad as Old Norse or as Latin. Similar to Spanish, I think. But the same thing, you've got masculine and feminine words, and you have to know which they are, and they're going to end differently. So, the English were having to deal with all this, and they're taking words, they're learning to speak these languages, and they're taking words and putting them into English. Well, these three different languages all have different rules. Well, that's going to get really complicated. So what English did over time, they just quit using inflections. So now English, so if you're, an inflected language takes its meaning from the inflections. And I can't remember, I'm drawing a blank on the word. A language that's not inflected takes its meaning from the positions of the words in the sentence. So like in Spanish, the adjective comes after the noun, right? Like you would say, if you were speaking Spanish and English, the house red, right? That would make no sense in English, you know, because that's not the way our language works. We have to have things in a certain order to know what it means, but not in an inflected language. In fact, in Old English, you could put the words in any order you wanted. Like, how crazy is that? I can't even, fathom that. So anyway, the point is, and I think this is where trouble can come, is that we don't do many inflections in English. Where we do is with verbs. So verbs change according to, one, they have to match the subject, right? So if you have one person doing an action, it's a singular subject, you need a singular verb. So usually, a singular verb has an S on the end. Jim walks to school, right? So you've got one person, singular verb. But if you got more than one person, they walk. And I think that's where it can be confusing too, especially if English isn't your first language. And it's amazing how we learn language, right? Like, I grew up here. English is, my first and only pretty much language, although I've taken some in college, and sometimes I can do okay writing. Speaking is a whole other thing. I don't remember anyone sitting me down and saying, oh, well, when it's more than one person, you need to add an S to most verbs, but some don't. You just learn that, right, as a kid. It's amazing. And how you can't even say why something's right, but just by your ear, you know it's wrong when you hear it. You're like, oh, that's not right. It's really a cool thing. So, with English, subjects and verbs must agree in number, and that's pretty much the only thing. If in other languages, you'd have to worry about gender. If your noun is masculine, then the adjective has to be masculine or something like that. Yeah, see, I'm not very good at it, but it's a whole lot more work, but it comes automatically, I'm sure, right? You're not stressed out about that. So, for instance, here we have the dog chases the cat, right? One dog chases. Chase is your root verb, and it's inflected by adding an S onto it. Chases. And then, if you want to get even further into it, when we talk about tense, like when something happens, that's an inflection also, right? If the dog was dealing with the cat yesterday, then it's chased, right? And so that's just an inflection. Same if it's going to happen tomorrow, the dog will chase. And so that inflection actually involves a whole other word, right? But in this case, we're just worried about, we want our subjects to agree with the verbs. So the dog chases, but if you have two or more, the dogs chase. So, and I think that can be confusing too, especially if someone didn't grow up speaking English. Well, why do you make a noun plural by adding an S, and you make a verb plural by taking an S away? Like, and it doesn't make sense when you say it out loud, but that's the way it works. So this is just the basic form. You need to have a plural noun goes with a plural verb, and a singular noun goes with a singular verb. Let's see. And I don't want to get too lost in the weeds with it, because then I think it gets more complicated and gets more confusing than just knowing they need to match in number. And so these, like, let me see if I can get that down a little bit. So the word have is an irregular verb. And so this would be left over even more so from inflections because it looks different, right? We have has and we have have. That's not just as simple as adding an S to something. But the same way here, it's singular, girl has. And then here, girls have. Okay? And then that works even if it's a verb phrase. Has been talking or have been talking. Let's see if these are. Okay, so at Yellowstone Park, grizzly bears doesn't or don't? Don't, yeah. Does is just the plural version of do. So do not. Yeah, grizzly bears do not. Let's type that in. And what about in the meeting between human and bear? A wild card factor throws or throw? Factor throws. Yep. And then what about the Yellowstone authorities should, has, or have? Authorities should have. Yes. Authorities have. And then what can make these complicated is, there's a helping verb between your subject and your verb. And, as we just sort of mentioned, a lot of what we do is done by ear. How does it sound? And so if you throw words in between, that can throw you off because this is what you just heard. But it doesn't matter if it agrees with should. It matters if it agrees with authorities. So yeah, authorities have. And then what about when some bears encounters or encounter? Encounter, yep. And then the great national parks, holds or hold? Okay, these we answer correct or incorrect. Behind an experimental fenced yard protecting campers in Glacier National Park, 6 visitors has been fatally mauled by grizzlies in the past 19 years. Incorrect, right. Why is that incorrect? Well, it should be have, right? Exactly. What about number 7? Meandering downriver toward a deer, 3 grizzly cubs comes within 15 yards of it. Come, yeah. So another incorrect. What about to a grizzly, almost anything are food except rocks? Incorrect, yeah. It should be what? Is, yeah. And so that's another irregular, or this would have been a word that was heavily inflected back in Old English. And it's funny, a lot of things get sort of set in about the 1200s when more people start writing and reading. And then even before the late 1800s, the first dictionary was in the 1700s, but they didn't come very common. In fact, in America, we didn't really have any serious dictionaries until the early 1900s. So before that, you could kind of just spell however you wanted because you weren't going to have someone say, well, go, that's wrong, go get the dictionary, because there wasn't one, So, and it's interesting, once, before 1200, the only people that could write or super rich people and priests, because they needed to be able to read and write the Bible so I could tell you what it said, right? And you couldn't argue with me because you couldn't read. So once, after the 1200s, more people start to read and write, then things start to get set, because I can't just do anything the way I want if you're going to look at it later. You know, you need to be able to know what that means. Once again, this is all driven by capitalism. Most of this is, okay, I've got, 15 black and white cows, I've got 15 brown cows, and I've got 30 piebald or whatever, right? So keeping an inventory of stuff and writing that down. If we're going to make a deal, I'm going to trade you some cows for some horses, we got to be able to agree on what it is we're doing, right? And then because we're human beings, we want to cheat each other all the time, we got to put that down on paper so that we can come back and take each other to court later, right? So incorrect. What about number 9? Lingering snow patches often become playgrounds for grizzlies observed making snowballs. I think it is. Female grizzlies mates every 3rd year in summer without their fertilized eggs implanting in the womb until fall. Incorrect. All right, let's see how we did. Ooh. Oh, apparently I didn't read the directions very well. I just found these things the other day. They're from a university in Maryland. So, okay. So how are you feeling about subject and verb agreement? And it's sort of hard to know because there's only 6 of us, including myself. But there was a good, solid handful of writing that had trouble with that, but it doesn't seem to be people here. So people that need it most aren't getting the help, right? Are you feeling okay with this? You sure? There's more we can talk about. Okay, the other thing that I had noticed, let me make sure there wasn't anything else on here that I wanted to point out. Okay, and this can be kind of weird. When you have a compound subject, so there's 2 subjects. So if you have 2 subjects and they're both plural, then it's easy, right? Apples and oranges, then you need a plural verb, right? And that's not too difficult. That's the complicated part too. Now, occasionally you'll have a compound subject with a singular noun and a plural noun. I had 1 apple and 36 oranges. Well, I used a had. But if those were your 2, let's see. The ranger and the camper see the bear. So we've got 2 things, which makes that plural. So we use see instead of sees. Let's see here. Whereas here, ranger sees, because it's singular, and camper sees, it's singular. But when we put them together, we have both. It's plural. Now, if we said the ranger or the camper, then we're singular, because it's one or the other. It's not both, it's just one of these. Okay? In one way you can sort of check that is if you use a pronoun, like they. If you would substitute they, then that's a plural pronoun, so you would use a plural verb. And obviously, if you have two or more plural words, they use the plural verb, rangers or campers, but both of those words are plural, so you use a plural verb. Now, where it can get tricky is, where is it? Okay, so if you have a compound subject and one is singular and one is, well, if both are plural, if you have a singular subject, the ranger, and a plural subject, and the campers, if you join it with and, you always use a plural verb. Doesn't matter, because you would have two things minimum, ranger and camper, and you have more than two with one of them because it's plural, so you always use and. Now, where it can get weird is if you are using or, and you have one singular, ranger, and one plural, campers, you use a singular or a plural verb according to which subject is closest. So once again, it's going to sound right. So you've got the ranger or the campers see. So you use the plural verb because it's right next to the plural subject. So once again, in English, it's a lot about the place in the sentence. The rangers or the camper sees. So you're closest to the singular subject, use a singular verb there. And same here. The rangers, the explorers, or the camper sees. So you have the verb is right next to the singular subject, so you use a singular verb. So that's one that can get a little tricky because it's about word placement. And that's just something you have to know. And it will, if you're, if you are familiar with English, it will sound right. Okay, I think that was the other thing that I thought. Oh, these can be kind of weird. We'll have group nouns. So you may think, okay, my team, right? Well, that's going to need a plural verb because my team is made up of 11 people. But your team is acting as one unit. So you say, the team is playing today. So you use is as a singular verb. And then there can be cases where, well, one, team can be plural. If you're talking about all the teams in the league, right? Then you would use a plural verb. Also, there can be times when you're referring to a collective noun, a group noun, but you mean the people individually. Every member of the jury will decide in a sense. So you're using a singular verb because you're talking about each member of the jury. And then the example they use are with people splitting up, right? So couple is a group subject, and they would act as a unit and use a singular verb unless the couple are separating, because the two parts of that couple are each acting individually. So that's just sort of something that you may want to take a second when you're dealing with group verbs, team, club, jury, unit, government, army, that kind of thing. Family. Let's see. Some things look like they're plural, but they're singular. Like the news, right? It has an S on it. That should be plural. No, it's a different word, right? Because if you took the S off, then you're talking, that's an adjective, right? So at some point in the history of English, which kind of makes sense, right? News is new. It's what's happening right now, right? At some point, the people speaking English in the world started using that adjective to mean it as a noun, the plural form as a noun to mean this thing. And then things like diseases often, because, like a measle, I think, is referring to the dots. So you don't just get one measle, right? You get the measles, but it's still just referring to one thing. It's the disease, Mathematics. You're not talking about several different mathematics. It's one thing. It's just the word is that way. Politics, same way. We're not talking about several different politics. It's just the word. Economics, same thing. Okay. And then there's indefinite pronouns. So there's sometimes these sound like they might be plural, but these indefinite pronouns, like they're not talking about something specific, a specific noun, they take singular verbs. Like somebody, like I may say, will somebody turn off the lights? In it, I'm talking to the whole group here. It may seem like it's plural, but in reality, I'm just asking for one person to do that, right? So these, even though they might seem everyone, that seems like it would be plural, right? But it's acting as a group. It's going to take a singular verb. These are just things to kind of, pause with and make sure, hey, does that sound right? Let's see. This is just saying that there can be prepositional phrases can come between a subject and a verb. We talked about this, and this can make things sound funny. The sentence could be, the boy is my brother, but you can put a prepositional phrase in there, the boy at the door is my brother. And once we start to separate subjects and verbs, it gets harder to hear what things might be. The car with many riders was speeding. Since riders is a plural noun, you might hear that and think that it's going to need a plural verb, but car is the subject. That's what it needs to agree with. It's almost like grammatically, prepositional phrases don't kind of count. Because this doesn't sound too bad. The car with many riders were speeding. Because you've got that riders right next to the verb were. Kind of sounds okay. But grammatically, this is not the subject. Car is. Okay. Okay. So that's all that I thought was important with that. And then the other thing I noticed was pronoun antecedent agreement. So the antecedent is the noun that the pronoun's taking the place of. So in ante means like before, right? So the thing that came before. And that can be a problem. In order to have a pronoun, you have to have a noun, even if it's a noun phrase, that the pronoun's taking the place of. A lot of times when we're writing a paper, and I think mostly just because it can be complicated, especially the more complicated our ideas get, we're having to use more complicated language to refer to them. And so I have just written a 3-sentence, group of words about an idea. And I do not want to write that again. So I say, or I write it or that, when there's no single noun that it or that is actually taking the place of. And so things can be unclear. So whenever you use a pronoun, I, you, he, she, it, them, they, that, it, it has to be taking the place of a noun or a noun phrase. Otherwise, there's going to be chances that your writing is not going to make sense. You know, and especially when we get into business, accuracy can be very important, right? If you use the wrong pronoun, you may be selling somebody a building for $9 instead of a building block, right? Even just in, I know there's a story here about a Kroger in Buckhead that ended up with a 99-year lease instead of a 9-year lease. So if you can imagine how prices change, their rent is going to be the same for 99 years. That's crazy, you know. Somebody made a big mistake with that. So let's see. And this just shows, you know, if you were talking about President Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address, President Lincoln delivered Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. That sounds weird. We don't talk that way. And it starts to sound silly. Like if I had to say Lincoln's name every time I was referring to Lincoln, you know, like Abraham Lincoln was from Illinois. Abraham Lincoln was a senator. But Abraham Lincoln was only a senator for one term, and then Abraham Lincoln lost an election. It seemed like Abraham Lincoln was going to be out of politics for forever, but rest assured, Abraham Lincoln came back. You know, that sounds silly. And it's a lot of work, too. And there's something about us as human beings, we want things to sound kind of pretty in a way. That doesn't sound pretty, you know. Our ears as human beings, we want things to change up, you know. We like it in a song when the tempo changes, you know. That's nice to us. It's beautiful. It's art. So we can say President Lincoln delivered his Gettysburg Address, and obviously we use his because President Lincoln identified as a man. We would not call him her unless he asked us to, but he's dead, so he's not going to. And so the antecedent is President Lincoln, the pronoun is his, and it's got to agree in number, right? We wouldn't say President Lincoln delivered their address because he was only one person, I guess, unless he had multiple personality disorders. And then he might ask us to say there, but once again, he won't because he's no longer alive. Okay, and then just like with the subjects and verbs, you can get into issues with pronouns when there's prepositional phrases or other words between the noun and the pronoun. That's why it can be so hard to use a pronoun that's referring to a noun that happened 3 sentences ago, because there's a lot of words in between those and a lot of nouns. So it's probably not going to be clear as to what you are referring. The can of lima beans sits on its shelf because can is singular. We use the singular its. We don't worry about the of lima beans there for our pronoun. This is talking about singular, you know, words that may not seem singular, like each is talking about one. So we use a singular, you know, his or her. With that, both is talking about more than one. So we're going to use a plural. We use their. Let's see. Some of it has to do with whether or not you can count things. Some of the sugar. You can't, I mean, you could try to count grains of sugar, but I would hate to have to do that. So we treat sugar as one thing. But if you're talking about like nickels, you can count a nickel, right? Except I guess we have a nationwide coin shortage, so you may not do that, but theoretically you could. So some would be either singular or plural, depending, right? Let's see. These are all pretty simple. The main thing that you want to remember is that it's got to be clear what your pronouns refer to. And we do it mostly because we're in a hurry. You know, it's 11:50, and this is due at midnight. I need to turn this in. So I just spent a paragraph talking about, you know, why it was the right thing for Lenny to, you know, murder his friend and of mice and men. I don't have time to hash that all out again, so I'm just going to say that, right? And then the professor's reading it, and he's like, that what? I don't even know what this is referring to. So just be careful with that. You know, take some time and make sure when you, especially, and I'm terrible at this, I use it all the time. And my professors are like, stop, write it out, you know. It has been a great day. Tuesday has been a great day. There's no reason for me not to use Tuesday. I'm just using shorthand, you know. So we got about 4 minutes left. This is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today, I think. You know, the only other thing I was going to mention was the tenses, past, future, and present. You know, and if you think about it like a timeline, you know, so, you know, walked is in the past. Walk is in the present, and then, you know, will walk is in the future.
Walking,
Walking, it depends. So you're going to have a helping verb like I was walking is going to be, you know, back here. He will be walking, and that's going to be over this way. So once again, and to me, those things can get confusing with prepositional phrases. You know, when things are separated, it's just not as obvious how they're supposed to work. So just keep that in mind. And mostly when this happens is, once again, when you're trying to express complicated ideas, and usually within one sentence, you're going to have things taking place at the same time. You know, Jim is not going to simultaneously drive his car yesterday to the store today, right? It's not going to work. He needs to do that on the same day, you know, in the same time, the same tense. Okay, any questions? All right, well, thank you for coming in today and braving the pandemic world. If you think of any questions, please email me. Otherwise, I will see you all next Monday, barring them telling us not to come back.
email you until assignments that are late.
Okay.
My business draft letter, and it's just only I just have to send it to you. I started a new draft this week, so.
The first assignment,
Yes.
the rough draft. You know what?
Oh no, I did send that to you.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say with the rough draft, don't even, because that's to help you with the final draft, right?
I just think it's in there because it doesn't have points. I remember you saying.
Okay.
So I think that's right.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, just email me if you have a question.
All right.
So next Monday is gonna be on the campus, right?
Yes, same thing. Yep, and unless, if they say not to, I will let you know.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a question.
Yes.
I emailed you about the rough draft email business letter.
What's your name?
Willie,
I'm sorry?
Willie.
Email me about a rough draft. What's
Yeah.
your last name?
I did it like wrong on the rough draft, but the final one, I tried to submit it. I can't. That's why I emailed you the assignment through email.
Hang on. What's your last name?
John.
Oh, okay. And yeah, and you were asking me about what now?
You give me one more shot.
I'll have to look at it, cause I don't remember any of the details. Which assignment is it?
Okay, let me show you. What was this one? Oh, this one.
Okay, the first, rough draft?
Yeah, 'cause I did this one wrong. Then I was trying to submit it the next week, this one. Or somehow.
Alright, so I will look for the email.
Yeah, 'cause
You emailed me about it.
I can't do it, like, when I said upload, I can't hit it, like.
No, cause you already have one there.
But this one is the first one, like the rough one, not the final one. This is the final.
Right, that's the Dropbox for the final.
Yeah.
But you're saying you put the wrong one in there, is what you're telling me?
No, I did the
Okay, so that's the rough draft.
yeah, this one I submit. Then next week, I try to submit this one, and the Dropbox.
Yeah, because there's already something submitted. So you want me to look at the final draft and see what's there?
Yeah, because I have the letter, and I completed.
Okay, I'll look and see what's there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, 'cause I had a grade of like 92. When I missed that one, it dropped